What do you think connects all of these things together? Faith healer William Brannan, Gnostics from the 2nd century, the Zohar, the Kabbalah, radical groups like the 3Ks. It's the doctrine of the serpent seed. Now, if you haven't heard of this before, I must pre-warn you that some of the content discussed in this video may make you feel a bit uncomfortable, but I feel that it's very important to discuss, and so I really must make this video today to make this absolutely clear what this is really about. So in short, the serpent seed theory is the idea that in the Garden of Eden, Eve was actually seduced by the serpent and consequently had intimate relations with the serpent, which led to the birth of Cain. In other words, a copulation with the serpent produced two different bloodlines, one of which was evil, with the birth of Cain, who then went on to murder his brother. Now, this theory has become quite popular in some circles online in the last few years. Despite it conflicting with the Bible in verses such as this,
"And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived, and bare Cain, and said, I have gotten a man from the Lord."
in verses such as this in the book of Acts, which states that God has made of one blood all the nations of men to dwell on the face of the whole earth, this doctrine has swept across the internet and continues to grow. But if these concepts didn't come from the Bible, then where did this idea actually come from?
And this multi-leveled conspiracy is there to keep that knowledge from us, to hold us in little me mental states, so a tiny few can control billions. Without this knowledge, we cannot understand the conspiracy. So you've got this reptilian group, and the ones involved appear to be relatively small in number, tiny compared with the global population, and they've imprisoned humanity in this tiny, tiny frequency range of perception called visible light.
Gnostics falsely believe that salvation comes from hidden knowledge. Now, in their confusion, Gnosticism teaches that the false goddess Sophia came to save mankind in the Garden of Eden by giving us secret gnosis to escape the god of the material world. Now, they think this was achieved through the supposed enlightenment offered by the serpent, which is a complete twisting of what the biblical narrative is. However, in some sects of Gnosticism, which follow a dualistic belief system, they saw the serpent as a double-edged sword who could both liberate and entrap mankind. That Cain was a product of this entrapment after he was produced from a supposed intimate union between Eve and the serpent, producing a hybrid bloodline on the earth whose offspring were purely evil. Now, on a side note, many of these mystic groups, they see this serpent not necessarily as a literal snake who was being used by Satan or even possessed by Satan in the Garden of Eden, but rather a being who pre-existed Eve, like an angel or a giant. In the book of Zohar, one of the most foundational books in Jewish mysticism, known as Kabbalah, the writer writes this: Nachash, which is Hebrew for the serpent, and I warn you, this is quite disturbing. The serpent injected his impure expletive to Eve, and she absorbed it. Therefore, when Adam had relations with her, she bore two sons, one from the impure side, Nachash or serpent, and one from the side of Adam. And Abel the second bore a resemblance to the higher form, and Cain the first to the lower. So some Gnostics saw Cain as a product of the lower material realm, and thus associated with the 𝐬𝐻𝐫𝐞, who they believed was a picture of the God of the Old Testament. So I'd like to ask you, have you seen this idea being popularized today?
But Satan knew this, for he come to her in the form of this serpent, which was the beast, and she was pregnated by Satan first. She gave birth to twins. One of them was certain seed, the other one was Abel.
The idea that there's a second bloodline of a distinct people group or ethnicity who are purely evil and cannot be redeemed by Jesus Christ. But one of the earliest mentions of the serpent seed concepts that I can find was in the Nag Hammadi library, which at least touches on the idea that Cain is a product of this evil material world, which is influenced in their false doctrine and blasphemy of the Creator God by the 𝐬𝐻𝐫𝐞. And this was directly rebuked by Irenaeus in his book Against Heresies. You know, I'm not an expert on these things, I'm just giving you my research here and where I see the thread of this coming from, and it's not coming from Christianity at all. You see it coming from Gnosticism, and you also see it in the Targum Pseudo-Jonathan, in which the serpent is claimed to be an angelic being who is named Samael. And Adam knew Eve, his wife, who had desired the angel, and she conceived and bare Cain. And she said, I have acquired a man, the angel of the Lord. But folks, these teachings do not appear in the Bible. Clearly, this is reading into the Bible things that are not there. It's mysticism. And with the Babylonian Talmud here, there's a potential mention. It says, what evil, however, could be involved here? That of infusing her with sensual lust. For 𝐟𝐸𝐿 stated, when the serpent copulated with Eve, he infused her with lust.
And they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables.
And then there's various quotes from mystical rabbis and others through the centuries here, which I will just mention. We have Yebamoth. Rabbi Yohanan began, when the serpent mated with Eve, he took advantage with lust. Other references include, another rabbi states, thus we have learned that when the serpent had sexual relations with Eve, he injected defilement into her. And a rabbinical source stated, Eve gave birth to Cain from the filth of the serpent, and therefore from him descended all evil generations, and from him comes the abode of spirits and demons. So you see it in various mysticism and Kabbalistic sources. One here, it says from the 9th century, Pireki of Rabbi Eliezer wrote, the serpent came into her, Eve, and she became pregnant with Cain, as it says, and the man knew his wife Eve. What did he know? That she was already pregnant. They teach this false doctrine that the first sin was Eve committing adultery with the serpent or being that was in the Garden of Eden. But then we fast forward to the recent centuries, and you get a resurgence of this with William Branham, who's a popular figure in the hyper-charismatic NAR circles. And William Branham's first pastor was called Roy E. Davis. And Roy E. Davis was an 8th Imperial Wizard of the Knights of the KK. And William Branham actually popularized this to millions of his followers. The idea of a serpent seed.
Search the scripture. She gave birth to twins. One of them was certain seed, the other one was Abel.
That was adopted by so-called Christian identity groups that state that a pure race will wage a final battle with the evil descendants of the serpent in order to destroy them. So you can see how this type of thinking and these type of ideas have progressed through the centuries. And then moved on to Christian identity groups through false NAR, word of faith, hyper-charismatic faith healers like William Branham, and then into, you know, around that time, because he was mentored by a guy who was involved, you know, the ethnic serpent seed type ideas. In more recent times, the false doctrine of the serpent seed has persisted through neo-NZI groups. Shepherd's Chapel was another recent one I've seen.
The good seed are his children, those that he created. But the tares are the children of the wicked one. Now wait a minute. We don't believe in the Satan seed doctrine. We don't believe that there's any children on this earth other than what God put here. Anybody that would teach the serpent seed certainly doesn't know what they're talking about, for my Sunday school teacher told me that Eve partook of an apple on a tree. Jesus is not a liar.
And also other fringe groups online, and I'm sure that some people here have been exposed to this because I've seen it. And you know, years and years ago, like 9 years ago, I definitely had like a view of Cain in a similar type of way, not to this extreme. Where do you see it online? Have you seen this type of thinking online, that there's a particular group of people that are subhuman or are not redeemable? Just have a think about how this could be used to promote anti-Semitism, to promote various other extreme ideologies. So I just want to finish this video. I hope this research has been helpful. It's just to try and convey the false heresy that comes in through these types of movements, and a lot of this weird ideas online, and a lot of agendas, you know, even grassroots agendas that are there to try and push people into false philosophies, false worldviews. And I just encourage us all to only see the authority of what is true doctrine is from Scripture, because we are warned that in the last days there will be doctrines of demons and people will turn away from the truth. So thank you all for watching, and I hope you are well. Take care.